Welcome aboard the rising word air, where every flight takes you into the serene skies of Japanese literature and peaceful dreams. Good evening, passengers. This is your captain, Alexander Harrow, speaking. Welcome aboard the rising word air. Tonight I am honored to guide you on a special journey into the world of Matasaburo, the Wind's Phantom, a masterpiece by Kenji Miyazawa. In this story, we follow the mysterious boy Matasaburo, who arrives with the wind, bringing a touch of magic to a small mountain village. It's a tale filled with the beauty of nature, the innocent curiosity of children, and the quiet wonders hidden in everyday life. We hope you'll feel the enchantment and warmth as you immerse yourself in this poetic narrative. Our crew has prepared everything to ensure your journey is as comfortable as possible. Please recline your seat, let your mind drift, and surrender yourself to the gentle winds of slumber. Thank you once again for flying with the rising word air. And now, let us take off into the world of Matasaburo, the Wind's Phantom. Chapter 1. Do-do-do, 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 blow away the green walnuts, blow away the sour quinces. Do-do-do, do-do-do, do-do-do. On the banks of the valley stream, there was a small school. The school had only one classroom, and while there were no third graders, all the other grades from 1st to 6th were present. The schoolyard was about the size of a tennis court, but just behind it lay a beautiful grassy hill adorned with chestnut trees, and in one corner of the yard there was a rock cavity where cold water bubbled up. It was a crisp morning on the first day of September. The blue sky echoed with the howling wind, and sunlight poured abundantly over the schoolyard. 2 first graders, dressed in black snow hakama, came around the embankment and entered the schoolyard. Seeing that no one else had arrived yet, they joyfully shouted to each other, "Hey, I'm first, I'm first!" as they gleefully passed through the gate. However, as soon as they glanced into the classroom, they froze in shock, standing stiff as boards. They looked at each other, trembling, until one of them finally burst into tears. The reason? Inside the silent classroom that morning, seated at the very front desk, was a strange child with bright red hair, someone they had never seen before. To make matters worse, that very desk was the crying child's own desk. The other child was also on the verge of tears, but he forced himself to widen his eyes and glare in that direction. Just then, from upstream along the river, "Choha Kaguri! Choha Kaguri!" a loud voice rang out. Moments later, like a large crow, Kasuke came running into the schoolyard, clutching his bag and laughing. Right behind him, Sataro, Kosuke and the others came tumbling in noisily. "Why are you crying? Did something happen?" Kasuke asked, grabbing the shoulder of the child who wasn't crying. But at that, the child also burst into tears. Finding this strange, everyone looked around. Inside the classroom, the peculiar red-haired child could be seen sitting upright and composed at one of the desks. Everyone fell silent. Gradually, the girls also gathered, but no one could say a word. The red-haired child showed no signs of fear. He remained seated upright, staring intently at the blackboard. At that moment, Ichiro, a 6th grader, arrived. Walking slowly and confidently like an adult, he looked at the others and asked, "What's going on?" For the first time, the students began to chatter, pointing toward the strange child inside the classroom. Ichiro stared in that direction for a while before firmly gripping his bag and walking briskly to the window. The rest of the students, now emboldened, followed behind him. Who's in the classroom when it's not even time yet? Ichiro climbed up to the window and stuck his head inside, calling out, "You'll get a scolding from the teacher for being indoors on such a sunny day," Kosuke said from below the window. "Well, that's not my problem," Kasuke replied. "Come on, get out already." "Hurry up," Ichiro said again. But the strange child only glanced around the room and at the others, his gaze darting here and there, while remaining seated with his hands neatly placed on his knees. The child's appearance was utterly bizarre. He wore a strange, baggy grey jacket, white shorts, and red leather half-boots. As for his face, it resembled a ripe apple with perfectly round jet-black eyes. He didn't seem to understand a word they were saying, leaving Ichiro completely stumped. He must be a foreigner. Is he planning to join the school? The students murmured noisily among themselves. Then out of nowhere, Kasuke, a 5th grader, shouted, "Oh, he's joining the 3rd grade." The younger kids seemed to accept this explanation, nodding in agreement, but Ichiro simply tilted his head in silence. The strange child continued to glance around curiously while remaining seated properly in his chair. Just then, a strong gust of wind swept through, rattling the glass doors of the classroom. The Japanese silver grass and chestnut trees behind the school swayed, turning a strange pale bluish color. At that moment, the child in the classroom seemed to smirk slightly and shift ever so slightly in his seat. Then Kasuke suddenly shouted, "Ah, I get it! He's Windsaburo." "That's it," everyone thought at once. But just then, a voice from the back yelled, "Ow, that hurts!" When everyone turned to look, they saw Goro angrily hitting Kosuke, who had stepped on his toes. Kosuke, now furious, shouted, "Hey, you're the one at fault. How dare you hit me?" and tried to hit Goro again. Goro, with tears streaming down his face, lunged at Kosuke. At that moment, Ichiro stepped in between them, while Kasuke held Kosuke back. "Hey, if you keep fighting, the teacher's going to come out from the staff room," Ichiro warned as he glanced back toward the classroom. But then he froze in surprise. The strange child who had been in the classroom just moments ago was now nowhere to be seen. Everyone felt as if a pony they had just befriended had wandered far away, or like a mountain sparrow they had just caught had slipped from their grasp. The wind howled once again, rattling the window panes, while the Japanese silver grass on the hill behind the school began to ripple upstream in a pale bluish wave. "See? Because of your fighting, Windsaburo left us," Kasuke said angrily. Everyone agreed, thinking it must be true. Goro felt deeply sorry. and forgetting the pain in his foot, he stood there with his shoulders slumped in dejection. He really was Windsaburo, wasn't he? He came on the 210th day, didn't he? He even wore shoes, right? And he was dressed properly too. With that red hair, he sure was a strange one. "Hey, look! Windsaburo left a rock on my desk," said one of the second graders. Sure enough, there was a dirty rock sitting on his desk. Yeah, and he broke that window over there too. No way, that wasn't him. That was Kasuke throwing rocks before the break. That's not true, no way. As they were arguing, something surprising happened. The teacher emerged from the entrance. He held a shiny whistle in his right hand, clearly ready to gather the students. And right behind him, the red-haired child appeared once again, walking briskly behind the teacher as if he were an attendant to a divine figure, wearing a white hat with a confident air. The children fell completely silent. Finally, Ichiro managed to say, "Good morning, teacher," prompting everyone else to echo, "Good morning, teacher." "Good morning, everyone. You all seem lively. Now let's line up," the teacher said, blowing his whistle with a sharp peep. The sound echoed across the valley and returned with a low peep. Everyone thought to themselves that it felt just like before the break. The 6th grader stood alone. The 5th graders formed a line of 7, the 4th graders 6, and the 1st and 2nd graders 12 in total, each class lining up in a single row. The 2nd graders, numbering 8, and the 4 1st graders stood at attention, ready for the teacher's command. During this time, the strange child stood behind the teacher, biting the side of his tongue against his molars as if he found something amusing or peculiar, glancing curiously at everyone. The teacher then said, "Takada-san, come over here," guiding the boy to the line of 5th graders. After comparing his height to Kasuke's, the teacher positioned him between Kasuke and Kyo. Everyone turned around and stared intently at the scene. The teacher returned to the front of the entrance and gave the command, "Stand at attention." Everyone straightened their lines once again. However, their curiosity about the strange boy got the better of them, and they kept sneaking glances or turning to look at him out of the corner of their eyes. The boy, seemingly familiar with the command, calmly extended both arms forward, his fingertips just barely reaching Kasuke's back. This left Kasuke squirming uncomfortably, as though his back felt itchy or ticklish. "At ease," the teacher commanded again. "Starting with the 1st graders, proceed forward." The 1st graders began walking, followed shortly by the 2nd graders. They passed in front of everyone, heading into the entrance on the right where the shoe racks were located. When the 4th graders began to move, the strange boy followed confidently behind Kasuke, walking with an air of pride. The students ahead kept glancing back at him, while those behind watched him intently. Soon, everyone placed their footwear in the shoe racks and entered the classroom. They sat down at their desks in the same orderly rows as when they had lined up outside. The strange boy also seated himself confidently, taking the spot behind Kasuke. But the classroom quickly erupted into chaos. "Hey! There's a rock in my desk!" "Wait, my desk has been switched." Kiko, did you bring your report card? I forgot mine. Hey Sano, lend me your wooden pen. Come on, lend it. Someone took my notebook. At that moment, the teacher entered the classroom. Despite the commotion, everyone stood up, and from the back of the room, Ichiro gave the command, "Bow." For a brief moment, everyone fell silent as they bowed, but soon after, the chatter erupted again. "Quiet down, everyone. Please be quiet," the teacher said. "Quiet down, Etsuji. You're being too loud. Kasuke, you too. Kiko, cut it out." Ichiro scolded the noisy students one by one from the back. The room then fell silent. The teacher began to speak. "Everyone, I'm sure you had a wonderful summer break. You probably spent mornings swimming, shouting louder than hawks in the forest, or following your older siblings to the upper meadows while they cut grass. But summer break ended yesterday. Starting today, it's the second term, and autumn. Autumn has long been considered the season when both the body and mind become focused, making it the best time for learning. So let's all begin studying diligently together, starting today. Additionally, over the break, you've gained a new friend. This is Takada-san, standing here. His father has come to the entrance of the upper meadow for work with his company. Takada-san used to attend a school in Hokkaido, but starting today, he will be your new friend. So, whether you're studying at school, collecting chestnuts, or catching fish, make sure to invite Takada-san to join you. Do you understand? If you do, please raise your hand. Everyone quickly raised their hands. The boy called Takada also enthusiastically raised his hand, which made the teacher chuckle briefly before saying, "Good, you all understand. That's settled then." At that, everyone lowered their hands in unison, as if the energy had suddenly been drained. But then Kasuke immediately raised his hand again. "Teacher," he called out. "Yes?" The teacher pointed at Kasuke. "What's Takada-san's first name?" "His name is Matasaburo," the teacher replied. "Wow, amazing! He really is Windsaburo," Kasuke exclaimed, clapping his hands and almost dancing at his desk in delight. The older children burst out laughing, while the younger ones sat silently, staring at Saburo as if he were something to be feared. The teacher continued, "Today, you were supposed to bring your report cards and homework. Those who brought them, please place them on your desks. I will collect them now." The students scrambled to open their bags and untie their cloth wraps, quickly placing their report cards and homework on their desks. The teacher began collecting them, starting with the first graders. At that moment, everyone was startled. Somehow, an adult had appeared at the back of the classroom without anyone noticing. The man wore a loose-fitting white linen suit with a shiny black handkerchief tied around his neck like a cravat. He held a white fan in his hand, lightly fanning himself as he looked down at the children with a faint smile. The students gradually fell silent, almost as if frozen in place. However, the teacher showed no sign of being concerned about the man and continued the collecting report cards. When he reached Saburo's desk, Saburo had neither a report card nor a homework notebook. Instead, he placed his clenched fists on the desk. The teacher silently moved past him, finishing the collection of the report cards and homework. Then, carefully arranging them in his hands, he returned to the teacher's podium. "I will review the homework notebooks and return them next Saturday. If you didn't bring yours today, make sure to bring it tomorrow. That would be Etsuji, Yuji, and Ryosaku, correct? Well then, that's it for today. Starting tomorrow, please come prepared as usual, and 4th and 6th graders, please stay behind to help clean the classroom with me. That's all for now." "Attention!" Ichiro called out, and everyone stood up in unison. The man at the back also lowered his fan and stood. "Bow!" The teacher and students all bowed, and the man at the back gave a slight nod in return. The younger students dashed out of the classroom, while the 4th graders hesitated and lingered, fidgeting. Saburo then walked over to the man in the loose white suit. The teacher also stepped down from the podium and approached him. "Thank you very much for your trouble," the man said, bowing politely to the teacher. "He'll soon become friends with everyone," the teacher replied, bowing in return. "Thank you for your kindness." "Well then, if you'll excuse us," the man said, bowing deeply once again before signaling to Saburo with his eyes. He then headed to the entrance to wait outside. Saburo, under the watchful eyes of the other children, walked out through the main doorway with a calm and composed expression. Catching up with the man, the two of them crossed the schoolyard and walked downstream. As they were leaving the schoolyard, the boy turned back and stared intently at the school and at the other students, almost as if glaring. Then, without a word, he resumed walking briskly behind the man in the white suit. "Teacher, is that man Takada-san's father?" Ichiro asked while holding a broom. "Yes, he is," the teacher replied. "What's he here for?" "I heard they discovered a mineral called molybdenum near the entrance to the upper meadows. He's here to begin preparations for mining it." "Where exactly is it?" "I'm not entirely sure, but it seems to be a bit downstream from the path where you usually take the horses." "What's molybdenum used for?" "It's used to mix with iron and to make medicines." "So, does that mean Windsaburo will help dig it up?" Kasuke asked. "Not Windsaburo. His name is Takada Saburo," Sataro corrected him. "No, it's Windsaburo. Windsaburo," Kasuke insisted, his face turning red. "Kasuke, why don't you stay and help clean up?" Ichiro suggested. "No way. Cleaning is for the 4th and 6th graders today," Kasuke retorted before dashing out of the classroom. The wind blew again, rattling the window panes once more, and creating small dark ripples in the bucket of cleaning rags. Chapter 2. The next day, Ichiro was eager to see if that peculiar boy would actually come to school and start reading books, so he invited Kasuke earlier than usual. However, it seemed that Kasuke was even more curious than Ichiro. He had already finished breakfast, packed his books in a cloth wrap, and was waiting in front of his house. The two of them walked to school, talking about the strange boy along the way. When they arrived at school, they saw that 7 or 8 younger children were already gathered in the schoolyard playing stick-hiding games. However, the strange boy was nowhere to be seen. Thinking he might be inside the classroom like the day before, they peeked in. The room was silent and empty, with the blackboard faintly streaked with white marks left behind by yesterday's cleaning. "That guy from yesterday hasn't shown up yet," Ichiro said. "Yeah," Kasuke replied, glancing around. Ichiro walked over to the horizontal bar and climbed up with some difficulty using a technique called jamiagari. Slowly, he shifted his arms closer together and moved to the right support beam, where he sat and looked intently in the direction Saburo had gone the day before. The valley stream sparkled as it flowed that way, and higher up on the mountain, the wind seemed to be blowing, causing the Japanese silver grass to ripple in pale waves. Kasuke, too, stood beneath the horizontal bar, gazing in the same direction as he waited. But neither of them had to wait long. Suddenly, Saburo appeared, coming from the downstream path, carrying a grey bag in his right hand as he hurried along. "He's here!" Ichiro was about to shout to Kasuke below, when Saburo had already rounded the embankment and walked briskly through the main gate, clearly saying, "Good morning." Everyone turned to look at him, but not a single person replied. It wasn't that they didn't want to respond. They had always been taught to say good morning formally to their teacher, but they had never addressed each other that way. Saburo's confident good morning caught Ichiro and Kasuke off guard, leaving them flustered. Instead of properly returning the greeting, they muttered incoherently under their breath. Saburo, however, didn't seem to mind at all. He took a few more steps forward, then stopped and stood still, his jet-black eyes scanning the entire schoolyard. For a moment, it seemed like he was looking for someone to play with. However, while everyone kept glancing at Saburo, no one stopped playing stick-hiding games or approached him. Saburo stood there awkwardly for a moment, then scanned the schoolyard again. Then, as if trying to measure the size of the schoolyard, Saburo began walking in large strides, counting his steps from the main gate to the entrance. Ichiro quickly jumped down from the horizontal bar, stood next to Kasuke and watched intently, holding his breath. Eventually, Saburo reached the far end of the entrance, turned to face the others, and stood there for a while, tilting his head slightly, as if doing mental calculations. The others continued to steal glances at him. Saburo, looking slightly uncomfortable, clasped his hands behind his back and began walking toward the embankment, passing in front of the staff room. At that moment, a gust of wind swept through, causing the grass on the embankment to ripple like waves. In the middle of the schoolyard, dust swirled upward and spun into a small whirlwind near the entrance. The yellow dust formed a shape like an upside-down bottle rising higher than the roof. Suddenly, Kasuke shouted loudly, "That's it! He really is Wind Saburo. Whenever he does something, the wind always blows." "Yeah," Ichiro muttered, unsure if it was true but quietly watching in that direction. Saburo, seemingly unfazed, continued walking briskly toward the embankment. At that moment, the teacher emerged from the entrance, carrying the usual whistle. "Good morning," the younger children called out as they all gathered around. "Good morning," the teacher replied, glancing briefly around the schoolyard. "Now, let's line up," he said, blowing a sharp peep with the whistle. Everyone gathered and lined up neatly, just as they had the day before. Saburo also stood properly in the spot he had been assigned the previous day. The teacher, squinting slightly with the sun directly in front of him, issued commands one after another until everyone finally entered the classroom through the main doorway. After the customary bow, the teacher said, "All right, everyone, let's begin our studies today. You've all brought your supplies, haven't you? First and second graders, please take out your calligraphy guides, inkstones, and paper. Second and fourth graders, take out your arithmetic books, notebooks, and pencils. Fifth and sixth graders, bring out your Japanese language books." Soon the classroom erupted into chaos as students scrambled to get their materials. Among them, Sataro, a fourth grader sitting right next to Saburo, suddenly reached out and snatched the pencil from Kaio, a second grader and his younger sister. Kaio cried out, "Hey, big brother! You can't take my pencil!" as she tried to snatch it back. But Sataro replied, "This is mine," and tucked the pencil into his pocket. Then, like a Chinese man bowing, he slid his hands into his sleeves and pressed his chest firmly against the desk. Kaio stood up and said, "Big brother, you lost your wooden pencil in the shed yesterday. Give it back," as she desperately tried to retrieve it. But Sataro, as immovable as a fossilized crab clinging to the desk, wouldn't budge. In the end, Kaio stood there, her mouth twisting as she was on the verge of tears. Saburo, who had his Japanese language book neatly placed on his desk, watched the scene with a troubled expression. When he saw Kaio finally burst into tears, he silently placed the half-length pencil he had been holding onto Sataro's desk. Sataro suddenly perked up and sat upright. "Are you giving this to me?" he asked Saburo. Saburo hesitated for a moment, but then, as if resigning himself, replied, "Yeah." Sataro burst out laughing and pulled the pencil from his pocket, handing it to Kaio's small red hands. The teacher was busy on the other side of the room, pouring water into the inkstones for the first graders, and Kasuke, sitting in front of Saburo, was unaware of what had happened. However, Ichiro, watching from the very back of the classroom, had seen everything. He felt an indescribable strange emotion and clenched his teeth tightly. "All right, second graders, let's review the subtraction we learned before the break. Try solving this problem," the teacher said as he wrote 25 minus 12 equals on the blackboard. The second graders diligently copied the equation into their notebooks. Kaio leaned her head close to her notebook as she copied the problem. "Fourth graders, solve this one," the teacher said, writing 17 times 4 equals on the blackboard. The fourth graders, including Sataro, Kizo, and Kosuke, all copied it down. Fifth graders, open your readers to page 72 and read as much as you can silently. Write down any unfamiliar words in your notebooks, the teacher instructed. The fifth graders all began following the instructions. "Ichiro, look over page 89 in your reader and also write down any unfamiliar characters," the teacher instructed. After saying this, the teacher stepped down from the podium and began checking the first graders' calligraphy one by one. Saburo held the book firmly on his desk with both hands, reading the assigned page intently, almost holding his breath. However, he hadn't written a single word in his notebook. It was unclear whether he genuinely didn't encounter any unfamiliar characters, or if it was because he had given his only pencil to Sataro. After a while, the teacher returned to the podium, demonstrated calculations for the 2nd and 4th graders, and gave them new problems. Next, he wrote the unfamiliar words from the 5th graders' notebooks on the blackboard, adding readings and explanations for each. Then the teacher said, "Kazuke, please read this part." Kazuke stumbled a few times but managed to read with the teacher's guidance. Saburo sat silently listening. The teacher also picked up his book and listened attentively. After Kazuke had read about 10 lines, the teacher said, "That's enough," and began reading the next section himself. Once everyone had taken their turn, the teacher instructed the class to start putting away their materials. The teacher then stood at the podium and said, "That's it for today." From the back, Ichiro called out, "Attention!" After everyone bowed, they exited the classroom in order. This time, instead of forming lines outside, they scattered to play freely. The 2nd period was a singing lesson for all the students, from 1st to 6th grade. The teacher brought out a mandolin, and everyone sang 5 songs they had learned before, accompanied by the teacher's playing. Saburo knew all the songs as well, and joined in enthusiastically with the others. The periods seemed to fly by in no time. In the 3rd period, the 2nd and 4th graders had Japanese language lessons, while the 5th and 6th graders worked on mathematics. The teacher wrote problems on the blackboard for the 5th and 6th graders to solve. After a while, when Ichiro finished writing his answer, he glanced over at Saburo. Saburo, it turned out, had produced a small piece of charcoal from somewhere and was vigorously scribbling large calculations across his notebook. Chapter 3. The next morning, the sky was clear, and the valley stream murmured softly. Ichiro invited Kazuke, Sataro, and Itsuji along, and together they headed towards Saburo's house. They crossed the stream a bit downstream from the school, then stopped by the bank to each break off a branch of willow. They peeled the green bark, making whips, and swung them through the air with a whooshing sound as they climbed the path leading to the upper meadow. Soon, they were already out of breath. "Do you think Matasaburo will really be waiting for us by that spring?" "He'll be there. Matasaburo doesn't lie." "Ah, it's so hot. I wish a breeze would blow." "Where do you think the wind is coming from?" "Maybe Matasaburo can summon it." "Hey, doesn't the sun look kind of hazy now?" A few small white clouds appeared in the sky. They had climbed quite a bit higher by now. Below, they could see all the houses in the valley, and the roof of Ichiro's family's woodshed glimmered white in the sunlight. The path led into the woods, and for a while it was damp, with nothing visible beyond the trees. Before long, however, they arrived near the promised spring. From somewhere ahead, Saburo's high-pitched voice called out, "Hey, did you all make it?" The group hurriedly scrambled up the path. Around the bend, Saburo stood, his small lips tightly pressed together, watching the 3 of them approach. When they finally reached him, they were so out of breath that they couldn't say a word right away. Kazuke, feeling frustrated, threw his head back and yelled, "Hoo-ha!" as if to force the air out of his lungs. Saburo laughed loudly at this. "You sure kept me waiting, and it might rain today, you know." "Then let's get moving quickly. But first, I'm going to drink some water." The three of them wiped their sweat and crouched by the spring, scooping up the cold water gushing from the pure white rocks and drinking it again and again. "My house is close to here," Saburo said. "It's just above that ravine over there. Let's stop by on our way back." "Sure, but first, let's get to the meadow." As they started walking again, the spring gurgled as if to warn them, and the nearby trees seemed to rustle loudly. The five of them moved on, weaving through thickets at the edge of the forest and crossing small patches of crumbling rock. They were now nearing the entrance to the upper meadow. When they arrived, they looked back toward the west where they had come from. Beyond the many overlapping hills, shining and shadowed in turns, the true meadow stretched faintly blue along the river. "Look, that's the river." "It looks like the sash of Kasuga Myojin," Saburo said. "Like what?" Ichiro asked. "It looks like the sash of Kasuga Myojin. Have you ever seen a god's sash?" "I saw one in Hokkaido." Everyone fell silent, not understanding what he meant. They were now truly at the entrance to the upper field. In the neatly mown grass stood a large chestnut tree, its trunk charred black at the base, forming a large hollow. On its branches hung old ropes and torn straw sandals. "If we go a bit further, we'll find people cutting grass. There's also a place with horses," Ichiro said, taking the lead and walking briskly along a narrow path through the cut grass. Saburo followed behind him, saying, "There are no bears here, so it's okay to let the horses roam free." After walking for a while, they came to a spot where a large oak tree stood by the roadside. A woven bag made of rope was lying there, and bundles of grass were scattered around. Two horses, carrying bundles of grass on their backs, snorted softly when they saw Ichiro. "Hey brother, are you there? Brother, we're here," Ichiro shouted, wiping the sweat from his face. "Hey, stay there! I'm coming now!" came his brother's voice from a hollow in the distance. The sun suddenly brightened, and his brother emerged from the grass with a smile. "Good job coming. Did you bring everyone along? Good. On your way back, take the horses with you. It'll likely get cloudy by noon today. I'll finish gathering the grass here, so if you're going to play, stay inside that embankment. There are still about 20 horses from the ranch there." As his brother was about to leave, he turned back and said, "Don't go outside the embankment. If you get lost, it'll be dangerous. I'll come back around noon." "Okay, we'll stay inside the embankment," Ichiro replied. With that, Ichiro's brother went on his way. The sky was covered with thin clouds, and the sun appeared like a white mirror, moving in the opposite direction to the clouds. A breeze began to blow, and the uncut grass rippled like waves. Ichiro took the lead, walking straight down the small path, and soon they arrived at an embankment. At a broken section of the embankment, 2 logs were placed horizontally across. When Etsuji tried to duck under them, Kasuke said, "Let's take this thing off," and removed one end of the log, lowering it to the ground. Everyone jumped over it and entered the area. On a slightly elevated spot ahead, about 7 shiny brown horses were gathered, lazily swishing their tails. Each of these horses must be worth over 1,000 yen. Next year they'll all start competing in horse races, Ichiro said as he approached the horses. The horses, as if they had been lonely until now, came over to Ichiro and the others, stretching out their noses as if asking for something. Ah, they must want salt, everyone said, holding out their hands to let the horses lick them. Saburo, however, seemed uneasy around the horses and shoved his hands into his pockets. Wow, Saburo's scared of the horses, Etsuji exclaimed. I'm not scared, Saburo retorted, pulling his hands out of his pockets and reaching toward the horse's nose. But when the horse stretched its neck and stuck out its tongue, Saburo quickly changed his expression and shoved his hand back into his pocket. Wow, Saburo's scared of the horses, Etsuji said again. Saburo blushed bright red and fidgeted for a while before saying, Then, let's have a horse race. Everyone wondered, how do you do a horse race? Saburo explained, I've seen horse races lots of times, but these horses don't have saddles, so we can't ride them. Let's each pick a horse to chase, and whoever gets their horse to that big tree over there first wins. That sounds fun, Kasuke said. We'll get in trouble if the herders see us. It's fine. Racehorses need practice anyway, Saburo replied. All right, I'll take this horse. I'll take this one. Then I'll take this one, Saburo said. Everyone lightly tapped their chosen horse with willow branches or blades of grass, saying, Shoo! However, the horses didn't budge. They just kept their heads down, sniffing the grass or gazing at the scenery. Then Ichiro clapped his hands sharply and shouted, Go! Suddenly all 7 horses began to gallop as if in unison, their manes flying. Wow! Kasuke shouted as he jumped and started running after them. But it wasn't much of a race. The horses ran side by side at a leisurely pace and didn't move as fast as a real racehorse. Still, everyone had fun, shouting, Go! As they chased the horses with all their might. The horses slowed down after a while. Everyone, slightly out of breath, paused for a moment, but quickly resumed the chase. Eventually, the horses made a turn around the small hill and returned to the broken part of the embankment where the 5 of them had first entered. Ah, the horses are escaping. Stop them! Stop them! Ichiro shouted, turning pale with panic. Indeed, it seemed that the horses had gone beyond the embankment. They were running quickly, almost about to leap over the wooden bar. Ichiro, in a flurry, yelled, Whoa, whoa, whoa! As he ran with all his might. By the time he reached the spot, spreading his arms out frantically, 2 of the horses had already escaped beyond the fence. Hurry up and stop them! Quickly! Ichiro gasped as he called out, hurriedly setting the wooden bar back in place. The other 4 boys ran over, ducking under the bar and chasing the escaped horses. Outside the embankment, the 2 horses had stopped running and were now calmly pulling up grass with their mouths. Approach them slowly and stop them, Ichiro instructed as he firmly grasped the tag hanging from one horse's bridle. Kasuke and Saburo tried to approach the other horse, but it startled and bolted southward along the embankment. "Hey, the horse is running away! It's running away!" Ichiro shouted desperately from behind. Saburo and Kasuke chased after it with all their strength. However, this time the horse seemed truly determined to escape. It darted through tall grass, navigating rises and dips in the terrain, running as far as it could. Kasuke's legs began to grow numb, and he soon lost track of where he was or which way he was running. The world around him turned pale and dizzying, and finally, he collapsed into the tall grass. The last thing he saw was the horse's red mane and Saburo's white hat disappearing into the distance. Lying on his back, Kasuke stared up at the sky. It shone white and spun around him, while thin grey clouds raced across its surface. He could hear a metallic clanging in the distance. Gathering himself, Kasuke slowly stood up and began walking in the direction the horse had gone, panting heavily. Among the grass, he spotted faint traces that looked like the path the horse and Saburo had taken. Kasuke chuckled to himself, thinking, "They'll probably just stop somewhere scared." Determined, he followed the trail as best he could, but it soon split into several indistinct paths among tall goldenrods and thistles, and he had no idea which one to follow. "Hey, over here!" he called out. "Over here!" A voice, likely Saburo's, responded faintly from at a distance. Kasuke chose the middle path and pushed forward. However, even that trail occasionally disappeared or led through steep, impassable areas. The sky grew darker and heavier, the surroundings blurred, and a cold wind began sweeping across the grass. Mist and fog swirled around him, growing thicker and heavier, drenching his clothes. This is bad. Things are only going to get worse from here, Kasuke thought to himself. His heart raced as he realized that the faint trail had vanished entirely. The situation is definitely getting worse, he muttered to himself, his chest pounding. The grass brushed against him with a crackling sound, and droplets began falling steadily. Kasuke shouted at the top of his lungs, "Ichiro, come here!" But there was no response. Kasuke hurried back, trying to return to where Ichiro and the others were. However, it seemed he had taken a different path than before. For one, there were far too many thistles, and scattered rocks lay at the base of the grass, which hadn't been there earlier. Eventually, he found himself standing before a vast and unfamiliar valley that suddenly appeared in front of him. The silver grass rustled, and on the far side the valley seemed bottomless, disappearing into the mist. When the wind blew, the silver grass stretched its slender hands, waving them hurriedly as if saying, "Oh, Mr. West! Oh, Mr. East! Oh, Mr. South! Oh, Mr. West again!" Kasuke turned his head sideways, closing his eyes as the sight was unnerving. He quickly turned back and pressed on. A narrow black path suddenly appeared amidst the grass. It seemed to have been formed by numerous hoofprints left by horses. With a short, nervous laugh, Kasuke walked briskly along the path, but the path was unreliable. It would narrow to just 2 inches wide, then suddenly expand to 3 feet. Worse yet, it felt as though it was winding in circles. Eventually he arrived at a large, burnt chestnut tree at the peak, where the path divided aimlessly in multiple directions. It was probably a gathering spot for wild horses, as it looked like a circular clearing within the mist. Feeling dejected, Kasuke started retracing his steps along the black path. Unknown grasses swayed quietly, and when a stronger gust of wind came, it felt as though something unseen was signaling to the whole field, causing the grass to bow collectively, avoiding the wind. The sky gleamed and emitted a faint, high-pitched sound. Then suddenly, in the mist ahead, a large, dark, house-like figure appeared. Kasuke paused, doubting his own eyes, but the shape undeniably resembled a house. Gathering his courage, he approached cautiously, only to discover it was a large, cold, black rock. The sky wavered in white spirals, and the grass simultaneously shook off their droplets. If I've wandered to the other side of the plains by mistake, then both Matasaburo and I will meet our end here. Kasuke muttered half to himself and half aloud. Then he called out, "Ichiro! Ichiro! Are you there?" The surroundings brightened momentarily, and the grass collectively sighed, as if in relief. He suddenly recalled a phrase someone had told him. The electrician's boy from Misado was tied up hand and foot by the mountain men. The words resounded clearly in his ears. Abruptly, the black path disappeared. The world fell silent for a brief moment. Then, a powerful wind swept through. The sky fluttered like a flag, flashing white, while sparks crackled in bursts of sound. Exhausted, Kasuke collapsed into the grass and fell asleep. It felt like a distant event to everyone. Yet there was Matasaburo, sitting right in front of them with his legs stretched out, silently gazing at the sky. At some point, he had donned a glassy cape over his usual grey jacket and was wearing shiny glass shoes. The shadow of a chestnut tree fell blue upon his shoulders, and his shadow too lay blue across the grass. The wind kept blowing relentlessly. Matasaburo neither smiled nor spoke. He simply kept his small lips tightly pressed together, staring silently at the sky. Suddenly Matasaburo leaped lightly into the air. His glassy cape gleamed brightly. Kasuke opened his eyes with a start. Grey mist was rushing by swiftly. Standing right in front of him was a horse, moving sluggishly. Its eyes looked sideways, as if wary of Kasuke. Kasuke sprang up and grabbed the horse's name tag. Behind him, Saburo appeared, his pale lips firmly set. Kasuke shivered. "Hey!" came the voice of Ichiro's older brother from within the mist. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "Hey, Kasuke! Are you there? Kasuke!" Ichiro's voice followed. Kasuke jumped for joy. "Yes, I'm here, Ichiro, over here." Ichiro's older brother and Ichiro suddenly appeared right in front of him. Kasuke burst into tears. "We've been looking for you. That was dangerous. You're completely soaked. Are you okay?" Ichiro's older brother expertly wrapped his arms around the horse's neck and quickly fitted a bridle into its mouth. "All right, let's head back." "Matasaburo must have been scared, huh?" Ichiro said to Saburo. Saburo stayed silent, his lips still tightly pressed, and nodded. They followed Ichiro's older brother, climbing and descending 2 gentle slopes. Then they reached a broad, dark path and walked along it for a while. Lightning flashed faintly white twice. The smell of burning grass hung in the air, and a puff of smoke drifted through the mist. "Grandpa! We found them! We found them! Everyone's here!" Ichiro's older brother shouted. Standing in the mist, Grandpa replied, "Oh, I was so worried, so worried. I'm glad you're safe. Hey Kasuke, you must be cold. Come on in." It seemed Kasuke, like Ichiro, was also this old man's grandson. A big chestnut tree, half burned at the base, stood nearby. Under it was a small enclosure made of grass, where a small red flame flickered. Ichiro's brother tied the horse to a nearby oak tree, and the horse neighed softly. "That was quite an ordeal, wasn't it? How much did you cry? That kid there must be from the mining camp. Come on, everyone, have some dumplings, eat up. I'm grilling more over here." "So, where on earth did you all end up?" "We went all the way to the path leading down from Sasanagan," Ichiro's brother answered. "Whoa, that was close. If you'd gone down that way, neither man nor horse would have come back. Here, Kasuke, eat a dumpling. And you over there, you have one too. Yes, you. Go ahead and eat." "I'll go put the horse away, Grandpa," Ichiro's brother said. Sure. If the herders come by, there'll be a fuss. But hold on a bit, the weather'll clear up soon." I was really worried. I even went down to the foot of Torakoyama to check. Good thing everything turned out all right. The rain'll stop any minute now. "This morning it was so nice out too," someone remarked. "Yeah, well, it'll clear up again. Ah, here comes the rain." Ichiro's brother stepped outside. The roof rustled noisily overhead, and Grandpa looked up with a laugh. Before long, his brother came back in. "Grandpa, it's getting brighter. Looks like the rain's stopped." Sounds good. All right, everyone, warm yourselves by the fire. I'm going back to cutting grass." Suddenly, the mist thinned out, and sunlight poured in. The sun was leaning toward the west, and a few remnants of wax-like fog glowed helplessly in the new light. Droplets glittered as they fell from the grass, and every leaf, stem, and flower soaked in the last rays of the year's sunshine. Off in the distance to the west, the blue meadow seemed to smile as though it had just finished crying, and the chestnut tree beyond it radiated a soft azure halo. Everyone, completely worn out, followed Ichiro down from the meadow. At the spring, Saburo silently parted ways with them, his mouth tightly shut, and headed off alone toward his father's hut. On their way home, Kasuke spoke up. "That guy's definitely the wind god. He's the child of a wind god. The two of them have built a nest out there." "No way," Ichiro protested loudly. Chapter 4. The following day, it rained in the morning, but it gradually cleared up by the second period. By the 10-minute break at the end of third period, the rain had completely stopped. Patches of sky opened up here and there, and brilliant white scalloped clouds sailed eastward beneath them. Steam-like wisps of cloud rose from the silver grass on the mountain and from the chestnut trees. "Hey, want to go gather wild grapevines after school?" Kosuke whispered to Kasuke. Yeah, let's go. Saburo, you want to come along too? Kasuke asked. Kosuke muttered, "Ah, why do we have to invite Saburo?" But Saburo, not hearing him, said, "Sure, I'm in. I used to do that in Hokkaido too. My mom pickled 2 whole barrels of them." "I want to go too," said Shokichi, a 2nd grader. "No way. Why should I tell you about my spot? Last year I found a brand new patch." Everyone was itching for school to end. Once 5th period was over, Ichiro, Kasuke, Sataro, Kosuke, Etsuji, and Saburo, 6 in total, headed upstream from the school. After walking a short distance, they came upon a thatched roof house with a small tobacco field out front. Since the lower leaves on the tobacco plants had already been harvested, their bright green stalks stood in tidy rows like a miniature forest, giving off a strangely appealing look. Suddenly Saburo exclaimed, "What are these leaves?" And plucking one, he showed it to Ichiro. Ichiro turned pale with alarm. "Hey, Saburo, that's a tobacco leaf. If you pick those, the Monopoly Bureau will come down on you hard. Seriously, man, what are you doing?" The others chimed in, "That's serious, man. The tobacco monopoly guys keep track of each leaf. Don't look at me." "Me neither. Me neither," they all repeated in unison. Saburo's face went beet red. He shook the leaf around as if trying to think of something to say, then sounding upset, declared, "I didn't know, okay? That's why I picked it." Worried someone might spot them, everyone nervously glanced at the house beyond the rising fog of steam from the tobacco leaves. The place seemed silent and empty. "That's Kosuke, the 1st grader's house," Kasuke offered, trying to smooth things over. But Kosuke, annoyed that Saburo and a bunch of others were intruding on what he considered his vineyard patch, egged Saburo on again, saying, "Yeah, sure, Saburo. It's not like saying I didn't know is gonna fix everything. How are you gonna deal with this, huh?" Saburo fell silent for a moment, apparently not sure what to do. Then he said, "Fine, I'll just leave it here, all right?" And gently placed the leaf at the base of the nearby tree. Ichiro called out, "Let's get going," and started walking, so everyone followed. Kosuke lingered, muttering, "Well, don't blame me if anything happens. Look, Saburo left that leaf right there," but then hurried along after the others. They climbed a narrow path among the tall grasses for a short way up the mountain. On a south-facing slope, scattered chestnut trees stood among dense clusters of grapevines that formed a big thicket. "I found this place, so don't take too many," Kosuke warned. Then Saburo said, "I'll pick chestnuts," and picked up a stone, throwing it at one of the branches. A green chestnut burr dropped to the ground. He used a stick to pry it open, taking out 2 still white chestnuts. Meanwhile, everyone else was entirely focused on gathering grapes. At one point, as Kosuke made his way under a chestnut tree on his way to a different patch of vines, a sudden downpour of water droplets came splashing down on him all at once, soaking his shoulders and back. Startled, he looked up with his mouth open, only to see Saburo perched in the tree above, chuckling slightly while wiping his own face with his sleeve. "Hey, Matasaburo, what do you think you're doing?" Kosuke yelled up at the tree, looking annoyed. "The wind blew," Saburo replied from above, snickering to himself. Kosuke moved away from that tree and headed to another grape thicket. By now he had collected more grapes than he could carry, piling them up all over the place, and his mouth was stained purple, making it look unusually large. "All right, think we should head back now?" Ichiro suggested. "I still want to pick more," Kosuke insisted. Just then, Kosuke got another sudden drench of cold droplets, this time on his head. Shocked, he looked up again, but Saburo wasn't anywhere to be seen in the treetop. Still, from behind the trunk, Kosuke caught a glimpse of Saburo's grey sleeve, and he could hear the boy quietly giggling. That's when Kosuke finally reached his boiling point. "Hey, Matasaburo, you poured water on me again." "It was just the wind," Saburo retorted, and everyone burst out laughing. "Oh sure, Matasaburo must have been shaking the branches up there." Again, the group erupted into laughter. Fuming, Kosuke fell silent for a moment, glaring at Saburo before blurting out, "Matasaburo, the world would be better off without the likes of you." Saburo gave a mischievous grin. "Hey, Kosuke, I'm sorry about that," he said. Kosuke tried to come up with something more to say, but his anger clouded his mind, so he shouted the same thing again. "Man, Matasaburo, we don't need you or any stupid wind in this whole world." "Sorry, I'm really sorry. It's just that you've been picking on me a bit too much," Saburo said, blinking apologetically. Even so, Kosuke refused to calm down, repeating himself 3 times in total. "Hey, Matasaburo, the world would be better off without any wind, you know." Hearing that, Saburo let out a small chuckle and asked, "What do you mean by saying the world doesn't need wind? Go on, list the reasons one by one." He held up a single finger like a teacher. Kosuke felt like he was being quizzed and found it ridiculous and infuriating, but with no choice he paused to think before speaking. "You're nothing but trouble. You break umbrellas." And then, Saburo teased, stepping closer as if enjoying himself. "You snap tree branches and overturn things. And then what? You destroy houses too. All right, what else? You blow out the lights. And next? You knock people's hats off. What else? What else? You blow off their straw hats too. And? Well, you knock down telegraph poles. Then, you tear roofs off houses. Aha, but a roof is part of a house, right? Is that it? Or is there more? Then what? Well, you blow out lamps. Ha ha ha, a lamp is just another kind of light. Is that all? Come on, keep going. What else? Kosuke ran out of ideas. He'd already listed nearly everything he could think of, so no matter how hard he tried, nothing new came to mind. Saburo grinned, looking even more amused, and held up his finger again. Is that it? Really? Nothing else? Kosuke's face reddened. After another pause, he finally said, You break windmills too. At that, Saburo practically jumped for joy, bursting into laughter. Everyone else couldn't help but join in, laughing and laughing. When he finally managed to stop, Saburo said, See, you ended up including windmills, but windmills don't hate the wind. Sure, sometimes they might get damaged, but most of the time, they need the wind to keep spinning. they don't blame the wind at all. And man, your whole list was so hilarious, going la 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 the whole time and finally ending with windmills. This is just too funny." He burst out laughing again, this time until tears filled his eyes. Kosuke, having been so flustered and angry, ended up forgetting his irritation and started laughing along with him. Saburo then settled down and said, "Sorry, Kosuke, I was messing with you too much." "All right, let's head back," Ichiro suggested, handing Saburo 5 bunches of grapes. Saburo shared some white chestnuts with everyone, 2 apiece. Then they all walked back down to the lower path together, each eventually heading off toward their own homes. Chapter 5. The next morning, a clammy mist hung over everything, making the mountain behind the school look blurry and indistinct. But again, around second period, the sky started to clear up, and before long it turned deep blue. The sun blazed down, and by midday, when the first and second graders went home, it felt almost like summer. After lunch, the teacher kept dabbing away sweat on the podium, and in the humid heat, the 4th graders nearly dozed off practicing calligraphy, while the 5th and 6th graders struggled to focus on their drawing assignments. When classes ended, everyone hurried downriver. Kosuke said, "Hey Saburo, wanna go for a swim? All the little kids are probably there by now." Saburo decided to join them. This spot was a bit farther downstream from where they had gone before. Another stream flowed in from the right, creating a slightly wider riverbank. Just below it was a big cliff with a thorny locust tree growing on it. "Hey there!" The kids who had arrived first stood in the river, raising their arms and calling out. Ichiro and the others dashed like runners among the silk trees lining the bank, stripped off their clothes, and leapt into the water one after another with resounding splashes. Kicking and splashing alternately, they fanned out in a diagonal line heading for the opposite shore. The kids who were already there joined in, swimming after them. Saburo also took off his clothes and started paddling behind the rest, suddenly bursting into laughter midstream. Ichiro, who had reached the far bank with his hair flattened like a seal's and his lips turning purple, shook with cold as he asked, "Hey Saburo, why are you laughing?" Saburo came out of the water shivering as well. "This river's freezing," he said. "But what's so funny?" Ichiro asked again. Saburo replied, "The way you guys swim is weird. Why do you keep thrashing your legs so much?" He started laughing again. "Ah, shut up," Ichiro muttered, looking slightly embarrassed. Then he picked up a smooth white stone. "Wanna play stone catch?" "Sure," the kids cried in unison. "All right, I'll drop this from the top of that tree." With that, Ichiro scampered up the black locust growing halfway down the cliff. "Okay, here it goes. 1, 2, 3. He dropped the white stone into the pool below with a big splash. Everyone flung themselves head first from the riverbank, diving like pale otters to reach the stone at the bottom. But none could hold their breath long enough to get there, so one by one they popped back up, exhaling bursts of mist into the air. Saburo watched them closely. Then after everyone came back up for air, he dove in himself with a big splash. but he couldn't reach the bottom either and was forced to surface, prompting a chorus of laughter from the others. Right then, 4 adults appeared near the silk trees on the opposite riverbank. They were partially undressed, carrying nets and making their way toward the group. Ichiro, still perched in the tree, called down softly, "Hey, they're gonna set off explosives." So everyone went about picking up whetstones or chasing wagtails, doing their best to ignore the grown-ups and act like they had no clue about the blast that was about to happen. Then, over at the far bank where the pool lay, Shosuke, who worked as a miner downstream, looked around a bit before suddenly sitting down cross-legged on the gravel. He took out his tobacco pouch at a leisurely pace, placed a pipe to his lips, and puffed out clouds of smoke. It all seemed rather peculiar. Then he pulled something else out of his belly band. "Look out! He's about to set off explosives!" someone shouted. Ichiro waved a hand, signaling them to keep quiet. Shosuke calmly moved the fire from his pipe onto the item. One of the men behind him immediately stepped into the water and readied a net. Shosuke himself remained perfectly composed, taking a step into the river and tossing the thing he held under the locust tree. Suddenly there was a harsh boom, and the water bulged upward. For a moment afterward, the area rang with a high-pitched whine. The men on the other side all waded into the water. "Look, the fish will start floating down any second. Grab them," Ichiro hollered. Sure enough, before long, Kosuke caught a finger-sized brown sculpin drifting sideways. Behind him, Kosuke let out a kind of slurping sound, like someone sucking on a melon, because he'd just grabbed an almost 6-inch crucian carp. His face turned bright red with excitement. Others made their own catches too, shouting joyfully all the while. "Quiet! Keep it down!" Ichiro cautioned them. Then, from the white gravel bar on the other side, 5 or 6 adults came running, some bare-chested, some in only a shirt. Behind them, in a scene like something out of a movie, a man in a mesh undershirt rode toward them on a bareback horse. All of them had heard the explosive blast and came to see what was going on. Shosuke, arms folded, watched the kids fish for a moment. "Not much here," he commented. Suddenly Saburo was beside him with 2 medium-sized crucian carp, which he placed on the riverbank with a casual, "Here, take your fish back." "Huh? What's with this brat? What a weird kid," muttered Shosuke, staring Saburo up and down. Saburo, without a word, came back over to the others. Shosuke stood there with a baffled expression while everyone burst into laughter. Shosuke then silently began walking upstream again, followed by the other adults. The man in the mesh undershirt rode away at full gallop on his horse. Kosuke swam over to retrieve the fish Saburo had left behind, prompting another round of laughter from the group. "Blow it up with explosives and the little fish gets scattered everywhere," Kosuke cried, hopping up and down on the gravel. They made a small temporary holding area out of stones to keep their captured fish from escaping, then started back up toward the locust tree. It had become truly scorching. The silk trees looked droopy and spent, as though in midsummer, and the sky seemed like a bottomless pool of blue. Just then someone yelled, "Hey! They're smashing our holding pool!" Sure enough, a strange man with a pointed nose, dressed in Western-style clothes but wearing straw sandals, was churning up the fish in their improvised net cage with what looked like a walking stick. That man came sloshing along the bank toward them. "Hey, that guy's from the Tobacco Bureau." "The Tobacco Bureau," Satoru announced. "Saburo, he must have found out you picked that tobacco leaf. He's come to haul you away," Kasuke said. "Like I care," Saburo retorted, clenching his jaw. "Everyone, circle around Saburo, protect him," Ichiro commanded. So they sat Saburo on the innermost branch of the locust tree, and each kid perched on the surrounding limbs. "He's coming, he's coming. Look, here he comes," they whispered, holding their breath. But the man didn't seem to have any intention of seizing Saburo. He simply walked past the kids, heading to a shallow spot just upriver from the pool. He didn't cross the stream outright. Instead, he trudged back and forth as though washing his dirty straw sandals and gaiters. Watching his peculiar behavior, the kids lost their initial fear, only to feel a creeping unease. Finally, Ichiro spoke up. "Okay, I'll shout first, and then on my signal, 1, 2, 3, everyone else yells. Ready? Stop muddying up the river. The teacher's always telling us that. 1, 2, 3. Stop muddying up the river. The teacher's always telling us that." The man looked surprised and glanced their way, but didn't seem to understand what they were saying. So the kids repeated, "Stop muddying up the river. The teacher's always telling us that." The pointy-nosed man pursed his lips like someone taking a drag on a cigarette and asked, "You people drink this water around here?" "Stop muddying up the river. The teacher's always telling us that." He looked a bit bothered and asked another question. "Is it so bad to walk in the river?" "Stop muddying up the river. The teacher's always telling us that." Looking flustered, the man deliberately took his time crossing to the other bank. Then, striking a pose like some alpine explorer, he scaled the slope of blue clay and red gravel, disappearing into the tobacco field above. Saburo blurted, "So he wasn't here to catch me, huh?" And he promptly dove headfirst into the deep part of the river with a loud splash. The rest of the kids also felt something vaguely pitiful about both the man and Saburo, their hearts a mix of sympathy and bemusement. One by one, they jumped down from the tree, swam to the riverbank, wrapped up their catch in towels or carried it in their hands, and headed home. Chapter 6. The next morning, before class began, everyone was out in the schoolyard hanging from the horizontal bar or playing hide-and-seek with sticks. Slightly late to arrive, Satoru snuck in, carrying a shallow bamboo basket with something inside. "What is it? What is it? What have you got there?" the others called out, dashing over for a closer look. But Satoru quickly shielded it with his sleeve, then hurried to the rocky hollow behind the school. Intrigued, the rest of them followed close behind. When Ichiro peeked inside the basket, his face immediately grew tense. Inside was powdered Japanese pepper, sansho, the same type used for poisoning fish in the river, a practice that could get you arrested, much like using explosives. Satoru hid it in the tall grass next to the rocky recess and walked back to the schoolyard as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, everyone whispered among themselves about it until class started. That day, just like the day before, The temperature soared around 10 in the morning, and all the kids spent the rest of the classes impatient for them to end. By 2 o'clock, after the 5th period was done, they all bolted out of the classrooms at once. Sataro once again discreetly hid the basket with his sleeve, and surrounded by Kosuke and the others, made his way to the riverbank. Saburo headed there with Kasuke. They rushed through the muggy stand of silk trees along the river, humid and smelling almost like the gas used during the town festival, until they reached their usual locust tree pool. Towering summer clouds loomed in the eastern sky, and the locust tree shimmered with a bluish glow. Everyone hurriedly stripped down on the bank of the pool. Sataro glanced at Ichiro, then announced, "Line up in a row. Listen, if fish start floating up, go and grab them. Anything you catch is yours. Got it?" The smaller kids squealed with excitement, cheeks flushing as they lined the edge of the pool. Meanwhile, Pekichi and a few others were already in the water, waiting under the locust tree. With an air of importance, Sataro headed upstream to a shallow area and dunked the bamboo basket in the river. Everyone else stood absolutely still, eyes fixed on the water's surface. Saburo, however, wasn't looking at the water. He was watching a black bird glide across the top of the thunderheads piling up in the distance. Ichiro sat on a patch of gravel, tapping stones together absent-mindedly. They waited a while, but not a single fish appeared. Sataro's expression grew increasingly serious as he watched the water. Yesterday, when the dynamite had been set off, they would have caught at least 10 fish by this point, the others thought. Still, despite a good weight, not one floated up. "Not a single fish is rising," Kosuke muttered, making Sataro flinch, but he kept his eyes locked on the water. "No luck at all, huh?" Pekichi called from under the locust tree. That caused everyone to start chattering, and in a flash they all dove head first into the water. Sataro stayed crouched by the river's edge, looking a bit awkward. Then at last he stood and said, "Anyone up for Oniko?" "Yes, let's do it," the others shouted, thrusting their hands out of the water to play rock, paper, scissors. Those who'd been swimming quickly moved to where they could stand and joined in. Ichiro also arrived from the riverbank and held out his hand to join in the rock, paper, scissors. First, he designated the slimy blue clay patch at the base of the cliff, where that strange, sharp-nosed man had climbed the day before, as the safe spot. If you clung to that spot, the Oni, the it in tag, couldn't capture you. Then they played a version of rock, paper, scissors with no scissors and a single loser. But Etsuji was the only one who showed scissors, which made everyone tease him, and he ended up as the Oni. He ran across the riverbank, lips turning purple with the cold, and captured Kisaku, so now there were 2 Oni. They chased each other back and forth along the gravel and around the pool, capturing and being captured, and the game went on and on. Eventually, Saburo alone became the Oni. He quickly tagged Kichiro, and everyone watched from beneath the locust tree. Saburo told Kichiro, "Kichiro, you approach them from upriver, okay?" Then Saburo simply stood there in silence. Kichiro, with his mouth agape and arms outstretched, came running across the slippery clay from upstream. Everyone else prepared to leap into the pool. Ichiro climbed up a willow tree. But Kichiro, with that slimy clay stuck to his feet, slipped in full view of the group and crashed to the ground. The others all shouted and hollered, bounding over Kichiro or diving into the water until they scrambled onto the bluish clay safe spot upriver. "Come on, Matasaburo, over here!" Kasuki stood there, arms spread wide, mocking Saburo. Infuriated, Saburo snapped, "All right, you'll see." Saburo's hair was red and bristly, and from staying in the water so long, his lips had begun to turn a faint purple, scaring the other kids. To begin with, the clay slope was narrow and incredibly slick, so not everyone could fit on it. 4 or 5 kids at the bottom were clinging to the ones above, barely preventing themselves from sliding down into the river. Only Ichiro was calm at the very top, apparently initiating a little strategy session with the group. The rest huddled around to listen, while Saburo splashed steadily closer. They whispered among themselves. Saburo abruptly flung handfuls of water at them. Everyone flailed to block the sprays, which caused the clay to shift bit by bit, sliding them gradually downward. Seeing that, Saburo gleefully hurled more water at them. Suddenly, the entire group skidded and tumbled into the water at once. Seizing his chance, Saburo caught them one after another, Ichiro included. Kasuke tried to escape by swimming around the far side, but Saburo soon overtook him, grabbing his arm and spinning him around 4 or 5 times. Kasuke must have swallowed water, because he started coughing and wheezing. "Enough! Enough! I'm done with this stupid tag!" The younger children all scrambled ashore onto the gravel. Saburo stood alone under the locust tree. By then, the sky was choked with black clouds. The willow trees had taken on a strange whitish cast, and the mountain grasses were steeped in an eerie darkness. The entire scene had turned into something haunting and indescribable. Suddenly, thunder rumbled ominously from the upper plateau, and with a roar like a landslide, a torrential shower descended at once. The wind, too, whipped up in howling gusts. On the surface of the pool, large splashing droplets formed, making it impossible to tell water from rock. Grabbing their clothes from the riverbank, everyone dashed under the silk tree. Saburo, apparently feeling frightened for the first time, jumped off from under the locust tree and plunged into the water, swimming toward the others. At that moment, someone let out a chant. "Rain falls in buckets, Amesaburo, wind roars in gusts, Matasaburo." Immediately the rest echoed in unison. "Rain falls in buckets, Amesaburo, wind roars in gusts, Matasaburo." In a panic, Saburo scrambled out of the pool as if something were grabbing his feet, raced over to the group and shivered violently, asking, "Was it you lot who said that?" No, it wasn't us," everyone cried at once. Pekichi stepped forward, repeating, "Not us at all." Saburo cast an uneasy glance at the river, biting his pale lips in his usual determined way and muttering, "What the heck?" But his body kept trembling. They all waited for a pause in the downpour, then scattered to their respective homes. Do-do-do, 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 blow away the sweet pomegranate, blow away the sour pomegranate, do-do-do, do-do-do, do-do-do. This was the very song Saburo had taught them just recently. Ichiro heard it again, echoing through his dream. Startled, he jolted awake. Outside, the wind was roaring furiously, and the forest sounded as though it were howling. The pre-dawn light shone a bluish tint, filling the house with that dim glow across paper screens, over shelves, on the lantern box. Moving swiftly, Ichiro tied on his sash, slipped on his getter sandals, and headed down to the earthen floor, passing by the stable and opening the small side door. A rush of wind flooded in, carrying cold, stinging raindrops. Somewhere behind the stable, a door clattered loudly, and the horse let out a tense snort. Ichiro felt as though the wind had soaked down to the bottom of his chest. He let out a forceful breath and sprinted outside. By then, dawn had brightened things considerably, and the ground was wet from the rain. The row of chestnut trees in front of his house looked oddly pale and bluish, as though the wind and rain were violently washing them. Several green leaves had been torn away, and shredded green chestnut husks littered the dark soil. Overhead, the clouds glowed a harsh grey and were driven northward in great gusts. In the distance, the forest sounded like a raging sea, thundering and whooshing in waves. The cold droplets pelted Ichiro's face, and the wind threatened to snatch away his clothes. Still, he listened silently to the roaring sound, eyes fixed on the sky. He felt a gentle ripple in his chest, like soft waves. But as he continued to watch the wind howl, roar, and race across the sky, his heart thumped louder and more heavily. He realized that the wind, which had been so calm and tranquil under the hills and across the plains, had, at daybreak, suddenly launched itself in unison, heading north to the edge of the Tascarola Trench, as he called it. The thought made his face flush and his breathing quicken, as if he himself might be swept up to race through the sky with it. Dashing back into the house, he puffed out his chest and exhaled sharply. What a fierce wind! Today, the tobacco and chestnuts will all be ruined, Ichiro's grandfather said, standing by the small side door and peering intently at the sky. Ichiro hurried to fill a bucket from the well and vigorously mopped the kitchen floor. After that, he took out a metal basin, splashed water on his face, and grabbed some cold rice and miso from the cupboard, wolfing it down as if in a daze. "Hey, Ichiro, the soup will be done soon. Why are you rushing off to school so early?" his mother asked, stoking the fire in the hearth where she was cooking something for the horse. "'Cause maybe Matasaburo flew away." "Matasaburo? What's that? A bird or something?" "Uh-huh. The one we call Matasaburo." Finishing up in a hurry, Ichiro packed away the dishes, washed his bowl, then grabbed the oilcloth raincoat from a peg in the kitchen, carrying his geita in his hands as he ran off to fetch Kasuke. Kasuke had only just gotten up. "Give me a minute to eat breakfast, okay?" he said. So Ichiro waited a bit outside, by the stable. Before long, Kasuke emerged wearing a small straw rain cape. Battling heavy wind and rain, the two slogged their way to school. Entering through the main entrance, they found the classroom quiet and empty, but puddles of rain had blown in through gaps in the windows, leaving the floor soaked. Ichiro scanned the room, then said, "Kasuke, let's sweep out the water together." They grabbed palm brooms and swept the water toward the drain under the window. Right about then, someone, apparently already there, stepped out from the back. It was the teacher, oddly dressed in a regular thin cotton kimono and holding a bright red paper fan. "You're here awfully early. Are you two cleaning the classroom by yourselves?" asked the teacher. "Good morning, sir," Ichiro replied. "Good morning, sir," Kasuke chimed in, then immediately asked, "Sensei, is Matasaburo coming today?" The teacher paused a moment. "Matasaburo? Oh, you mean Takada-san. Actually, Takada-san left yesterday with his father. It was Sunday, so he didn't have time to say goodbye." "So he really flew away?" Kasuke asked. "No. His father got a telegram from the company and had to go back. He might come here briefly again, but Takada-san's going to enroll in another school over there since his mother's there too." "Why'd the company call him back?" Ichiro wanted to know. "It seems they've decided not to develop the molybdenum vein here for the time being." "See, I knew it. He really was the Wind Matasaburo," Kasuke blurted out excitedly. Somewhere near the teacher's quarters, a rattling noise sounded. Holding his red fan, the teacher rushed off to investigate. The two boys fell silent, each trying to guess the other's thoughts. Outside, the wind still raged, and raindrops pattered against the windows, causing them to fog up and rattle loudly. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now arrived at the final destination of tonight's journey. As the last words of this story linger, we invite you to close your eyes and let the calm embrace of sleep take over. Thank you for flying with the rising word air, where timeless Japanese literature guides you into peaceful dreams. Until our next flight, may your rest be deep and your dreams filled with wonder.